Welcome to the Coachful Coaching Leadership Podcast. I'm David Fung, an executive leadership coach and seasoned people leader. This podcast is all about helping leaders grow, navigate challenges, and build high-performing teams with real stories, insights, and strategies you can apply today. Let's dive in.
And with respect to burnout, the good news is that we do cause it ourselves 90% of the time, which means, however, that we can cure it. We don't have to wait for anybody else to shape up. One of the illusions of burnout for me was, well, it's my business partners or my clients or the bank or, all of them, sort of a victim kind of a ideology. And unfortunately, as my mentor pointed out to me, Scott, you're going to have a long wait if you're expecting all these people to shape up. They're not going to. So it looks like you're going to have to shape up.
And we're back to the Coachful Coaching Leadership Podcast. This is David Fung, and I'm here with my friend Scott Anderson today. Scott, good afternoon.
David, how are you? Boy, so great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you. So Omaha, Nebraska is where you're from, the home of Warren Buffett, and you're saying that he just shows up at the local restaurant just like everyone else.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because I was talking to a friend of mine about this. Most people in Omaha are value investors and can quote Warren Buffett. One of my favorite quotes, and I use this a lot in my burnout practice, is that he says the difference between rich people and very rich people is that very rich people say no better than rich people. I found that's the case with burnout too. We just don't say no very well, and that causes a lot of our own burnout.
Yes, we burn out. It reminds me of another dad joke. The wine business. How do you become a millionaire in the wine business?
I don't know.
You start as a billionaire.
Yeah.
Anyways, you don't make money in the wine business.
Yeah.
But hey, how about you introducing yourself to all the listeners out there?
Thank you. Well, we had a great conversation before this call. So I am a serial entrepreneur. I've started 10 companies and sold 8. I've started 2 nonprofit companies. One of them or nonprofit entities. One of them is focused on post-traumatic stress disorder technology or treatment technology for military families, first responders, police, fire, and rescue. And out of that, or to sort of be equipped to do that, I also went to graduate school in clinical counseling. I'm a licensed mental health therapist, as well as an executive coach. And so I my therapy practice is called Lonely at the Top because I work mainly with leaders and entrepreneurs, which is why I think we got together and know a little bit about how lonely it can be at the top. And so today my practice is partially therapy, partially coaching, but always with leaders and now particularly those that are either recovering from burnout or wanting to prevent burnout.
What's unique about that? Like, lonely at the top. And, I asked that question. It does feel lonely at times.
Yeah.
I could surround myself with peers, with, people around me, but the number of people who I can lean on and pure honesty and unbridled, unforgiving honesty is very few. The higher up I've gotten.
Absolutely.
And that leads to a lot of at times like tough times. Like I need to lean on some people, but it's not like when I was an individual contributor where I had 15 people I can lean on. Why is it lonely at the top?
Boy, that's such a great question. And, I think it's kind of 2 reasons. One is practically, if we're entrepreneurs and we're betting our own blood, sweat, tears, and money on a business, at the end of the day, we really are responsible to our customers, to our employees, to our investors, if we have them, and to our families. And so there on a practical level, there really is that singular individual responsibility. Having said that, I've also found and we talked before the show about how we do tend to cause our own burnout. And I think part of it is because people who are attracted to leadership roles, or especially entrepreneurs, are people who by definition want to go it alone. They want to break ground other people haven't broken. And they're doing it on their own because they haven't found a community to do it with, but also because they really want to do it on their own. They want to lead from in front. And that kind of visionary mindset is essential to starting anything, but it has a built-in kind of booby trap, which often takes the form of burnout or of runaway ego, or, really the despair and the loneliness of being, the smartest guy in the room is a very lonely person. And that's the trap. That's the booby trap that's inherent in in a lot of
Yeah.
entrepreneurs, certainly for me in my own case.
Yeah. Well, for yourself, like you mentioned, you've started and exited a number of companies in the past,
Yes,
and you've admitted that you've hit a wall. You've burned yourself out.
absolutely.
How did that moment?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm just curious how that moment changed your trajectory.
Well, it changed it completely, and I'll say, with hindsight, totally for the better. My life is infinitely better now than it was before I went through burnout. I still don't recommend it to people, but it's a very deeply humbling process, which I desperately needed. And a lot of my clients and colleagues and other leaders, you need the ego to blaze new trails, but it's a delicate balance. And in my case, what happened was I was running the largest of the businesses that I started, a advertising and branding company that was very successful. I had great partners who were very, very talented people. But I found that I was losing well, specifically what happened, and this is the canary in the coal mine for so many people with burnout, is that I would wake up in the morning expecting to feel refreshed, and I woke up exhausted. And that's a symptom that a lot of people experience. There's no one to report it to because it is lonely at the top. And you don't even want to look at it yourself because you're afraid, hey, I have to get up. If I don't get up and get out of bed, the wheels are going to fall off this and a lot of other things. But one of the most immediate symptoms of burnout is an exhaustion that doesn't go away. Even if you get a good night's sleep, even if you take a long weekend, even if you take a vacation, we've got clients that have taken 3 and 6 month sabbaticals and have come back just as burned out as when they left. But the illusion is, especially in the United States at least, is that you work for 50 weeks and just sort of hold your breath for 50 weeks. And then for 2 weeks, you recover. And it's, kind of sort of makes sense in theory, but it's not the way that we recover mind, body, and spirit. Anyway, my own experience was I just got to a point where I really wondered, am I going to be able to get out of bed tomorrow? Because I have to. But it got to a point where I was so exhausted and sort of dejected that I was really afraid. I don't know if I'll be able to do it. It was sort of the unfunny version of the movie Groundhog Day with Bill Murray, where he keeps waking up at 6:30 a.m. with Sonny and Cher on his clock radio, but it's not a very funny version of that movie.
What's your definition of burnout?
Well, the technical definition, which I think is pretty accurate from the World Health Organization, is a unrelieved episode of stress that results in exhaustion and often depression and anxiety and overwhelm. But the main theme there is unrelieved stress over a long period of time. And this is why the idea of taking a vacation, take a 2 week vacation every 50 weeks, as we tend to do in the US, really doesn't work because the way that the mind, body, and spirit recover from stress is not that way. The science of it is that the best way to recover from stress is to recover in real time. And so, for example, one of the practical techniques we teach all of our clients from the very beginning is to take mini vacations during the day to try to notice when you're stressed and overwhelmed or exhausted and we have a 5 second technique because our clients are way too busy to meditate or anything like that. So we've got a 5 second technique that is just incredibly effective, but it's counterintuitive because it calls for you to actually look at the problem, which most of us don't want to do. We want to avoid the problem or ignore the problem or work through the problem,
Hmm.
solve the problem. So yeah, I mean but that's really the definition. It's unrelenting stress over a long period of time that takes its toll physically and emotionally.
Yeah. So, what do you think is broken there? And I think so. I'll tell you my opinion. And I told you my opinion
Please.
at the beginning already.
Sure.
Was that there is personal responsibility, first of all,
Yes.
when it comes to burnout and exhaustion and stress. There are factors that are beyond your control as well. But I wonder, you say 50 weeks working, 2 weeks off, your typical American or Canadian. What's Is it really just the individual that might be broken, or is our system broken in how we value work and overwork? In especially North America, parts of Asia are like that too. And sometimes, when I look at Europe, month of July and August, there's no one to be found, and they know.
Exactly.
And at least my perception is they know how to live life over there. And
Well,
yet they don't.
it's much more a work to live rather than live to work kind of a model.
Yeah.
But that said, I mean, there are absolutely cases where our clients are working in environments that are genuinely toxic, are racist or misogynistic or
Mm-hmm.
otherwise genuinely toxic and unreasonable environments. And if that's the case, you should run away screaming. That's our advice if that's the situation that you're in, if it's irreconcilable, because there are plenty of other things to do and life is too short. Our experience, however, is that that represents a rather small percentage of burnout cases that we see, when it really is the environment that's causing the problem and not the individual is a fairly rare instance. As we discussed in before the call, we'd say in 80, maybe 90% of the cases, we're causing our own burnout. And people don't like to hear that, but it's almost always true. And the two kind of twin causes are, on the one hand, in addition to ego and unbridled ambition and a lot of fear fueling all of that, but is perfectionism on the one hand and no boundaries on the other.
Mm-hmm.
And those two things together can produce fantastic results, especially early in our careers when our expertise is low, our experience is low, our knowledge is low, but we compensate for it by working harder than anybody else, longer than anyone else, and never saying no. And folks who do that, at least in Western world, tend to get rewarded, and they tend to move up faster and farther than their peers. So if you're an ambitious person, it's a good strategy. It's just that superpower of never saying no and making everything perfect or trying is unfortunately also has a kryptonite side to it. And it's booby trapped with, as you grow older, as you grow, you add more relationships in your life, especially if you add a spouse or children, if you increase the people that you manage and all the rest of it. It's not a scalable model. But a lot of us are superstitious and believe, well, it worked in the past when I was 20. Now I'm 40. Why isn't my magic wand working anymore? But because it works so well, we tend to hold on to it for dear life. And sometimes it can cost you your dear life.
Yeah. It reminds me of the saying, what got you here won't get you there. And
Exactly.
yeah. And I guess, how do you start going about changing that mindset in people who think, and I've managed a number of people. I've worked alongside a number of people who believe it's not right or wrong. I need to outwork my competitor, whoever it could be a peer, another department, or an actual another company. Or I just got to be on. I just got to be constantly on, and perfecting this and making this super good. And these are the people I've worked with who are just constantly they're working themselves into the ground. What I'm
Exactly.
curious about is at what point do you see people change? Is it
Well,
possible?
yeah, it absolutely is possible. But unfortunately, for most of us, we need to hit some kind of a wall, like the Groundhog's Day wall I mentioned earlier, where we wake up one day and realize, I don't know if I can keep doing this. And that tends to happen and certainly in the 40s, where we've now acquired, because of our success, a lot of things and relationships and responsibility, so that the old model of doing things, working harder than anybody else, doesn't scale and no longer works the way it did. So the first thing that happens with our clients is they just realize that they've hit a wall, and they realize that they don't know what to do next, but they recognize that what I'm doing isn't working. That, yeah, exactly. I think it was Marshall Goldsmith who said, what got you here won't get you there. So then what we try to talk to with our clients is more about impact rather than inputs. We want to talk about impact. And with most of our clients, we take them through a time audit process, which we call the Genius Zone process. And we ask them to identify the 3 or 4 areas, typically it's 2, 3, 4 areas, that have the most impact of all of their activity all day.
Mm-hmm.
For leaders of businesses in particular, it tends to be some aspect of being a visionary, and also often some aspect of business development and or leadership within the business. But when we ask them to do this Genius Zone time audit, and we ask them, well, how many hours a week do you spend doing that? Often they'll say 0 hours or a half an
Mm-hmm.
hour or an hour. And we begin to see in part why this isn't working, why this isn't scaling. And often it's the reason why people's companies or careers have plateaued, because they continue to do the old things,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't spend any time with the activities that will move the needle farthest and fastest for them and for their companies. So then we look at, well, okay, what are you doing? And of the things that you are spending your time on, how many of those can be done by someone else, delegated, automated, turned over to AI,
Mm-hmm.
offshored, whatever, but to resources that can do these jobs better, faster, and cheaper than you can. And what we find is that, again, what we want to do is to see a shift from people putting 0 hours a week in their genius zone to putting 10 or 20 hours a week in their genius zone. And especially for leaders of businesses, the impact of that, not only to their psyche and their energy and their burnout, but also to the results of their company is phenomenal. And I mean, it just makes sense. It's not rocket science. But if you spend no time on the areas that are going to drive revenue, drive EBITDA, drive market share, if you spend, 20 hours a week instead of zero, there will be a reaction. But the biggest reaction is you're going to get you back and begin to recover from not only from burnout, but also from plateaued growth.
Yeah. Tell me a story, if you have one, about how you might have taken an individual from burnout to a place of like clarity and purpose.
Thank you. What a great question. And this is the reason that I do this. I mean, I can tell you actually in my own case,
Yeah.
I was able to, thank God, to break through burnout. I sold my interest in my advertising agency that had my name on the door and began to work full time as a executive coach and therapist, focusing on high performance leaders, and started to eat my own cooking, as our friend Warren Buffett would say, and to actually stay in my genius zone, not do the things I'm not good at, and to focus most of my day on the things where I can really move the needle in a way that others can't do it better, faster, or cheaper. I'll give you another example, though, that just one of our clients, and a story that just makes this whole enterprise worthwhile. We have a client in Pennsylvania who has a independent insurance agency, a very successful one. I believe he's either second or third generation owner of the business. And when he called us, he was working 60 to 80 hours a week,
Wow.
Monday through Saturday, sometimes Sunday. He wasn't seeing his family. And and also his business had plateaued. So he's working harder and harder and harder and harder. He hadn't taken a vacation in 3 years. He was missing his children grow up. He had that horrible existential crisis that I had and a lot of us had, where it seems like your life is a choice between succeeding at work and succeeding at home. Pick one. You can't have both. And
Mm.
that's kind of the jumping off place for a lot of our clients. Anyway, when he called us, that was what he faced. And we took him through exactly the process described our new book is called You're Not Toast, but it's a complete guide to burnout recovery. And we took him through this burnout breakthrough process, and beginning with a process of letting go of stress and taking mini vacations multiple times a day so he could begin to get his energy back and to get his hope back and just see a little bit of glimmer at the end of the tunnel. Shortly after that, we were able to go through this Genius Zone assessment process to identify, why isn't your business growing? And in his case, like so many of our clients, it's because he was spending no time in areas of impact, no time in his genius zone. So he was hating his life and hating his business, plus his business was stymied. And in his case, we identified everything that should be and could be done by someone else, better, faster, or cheaper, delegated or otherwise shed those things to people, systems, virtual assistants, AI, et cetera. And he went from working 60 hours a week to now he works 20 to 24 hours a week. He must take 10 weeks of vacation. He's right now skiing in Colorado. As a matter of fact, he was able to buy a home in Breckenridge, in part because his business boomed, but also
Mm-hmm.
because he now has the time to take advantage of it. He takes vacations whenever he wants. And the best part is that uh, you're probably familiar with Dan Sullivan's book, Who Not How. And he really practices that instead of doing things himself, which was always the knee jerk. I must do this myself. I can't trust anyone to do it. Instead, he's thinking about who can do this better, faster, and cheaper than I can. And that's really his whole go-to thought process. Anyway, it's just incredibly gratifying. And I get pictures of him and his kids on the slopes and him coaching his two sons in basketball. And that's why we do this. But he was on the verge of losing his family and really, losing himself. So that's why we do this.
That's such a wonderful story, Scott. Thanks for sharing that. So I'm sure there's a lot of people listening right now who are probably quietly facing some sort of burnout, afraid to ask for help, afraid to admit it. What are some steps they can take right
Well,
now?
thanks for asking that. Yeah, we want people to get that there is hope. That actually, and to your surprise, as dire as this is, and as you say, men and women lead lives of quiet desperation, as Thoreau said. But there really is hope, and you can quickly and permanently break through burnout by taking a couple of steps that are proven by research and certainly by our experience to work. The first step that we suggest to clients is we have a service called fastfixcall.com. And if you go to that site, you can schedule a free call with me or with one of our coaches, and we will have you take an online burnout assessment to determine whether that is actually the issue, and then to give you some steps that you can start taking today that are appropriate to your situation and get you started in recovery. We won't solve the entire situation in a brief call like this, but what we will do is help you understand where you are with respect to the burnout continuum and give you something that you can start doing right now today. Yeah, so it's called fastfixcall.com. It's free, and it's one of the more gratifying things we get to do is to really give people hope right now. That's probably the most important thing, the most gratifying thing that I do today.
You talked about it a few times, mini vacations.
Yes.
And I was thinking, oh, maybe a long weekend. You're actually talking about literally a 5 minute break, it sounds
I'm
like.
talking about a 5-second break.
5 second
And
break.
yeah, we have a technique that we call the R&R technique, and it really comes from a writer named Michael Singer, who you may know. He wrote Untethered Soul and the Surrender Experiment. A wonderful man. But in Untethered Soul, he talked about, it's just 2 lines in his book, but it's a technique that we've really run with. And basically the key to it is notice when you're stressed. And by that, and this is counterintuitive for workaholics and burnouts because we're afraid. If I notice that I'm burned out or that I'm exhausted or I'm stressed, that's scary to me. I don't want to look at that. I want to avoid it, or I want to flee into work. And that's where a lot of us escape the worry of burning out, is by working even harder, worrying more and working harder.
It's
So
ironic.
right? So what he suggests is take a moment to just notice that you're stressed, and not to understand emotionally or psychologically or anything like that, but just to find it in your body. Scan yourself from the top of your head to the bottom of your feet. And most people notice that between the neck and the navel, they'll find something where there is tension. There'll be a twinge or a pain or a tingle or something, but it's typically between the neck and the navel. For most people, a lot of it is in the shoulders or in the sternum and the heart area, and almost always in the gut. And what we ask people to do is just notice that, the way a scientist would notice a microorganism under a microscope. Just not to fix it, not to do anything with it, but just to notice that it's there, then to inhale through your nose, exhale through your mouth, and wherever that sensation is, imagining a door opening and that trapped stress gushing out. I like to use the metaphor of a summer fire hydrant. I don't know if they do that in Canada, but in the US, we open the fire hydrants, or at least we used to. But
Yeah,
just to
we do that when there's
allow,
fires.
okay, good move. But anyway, yeah, and just visualize it leaving. This whole process takes 5 seconds. And in fact, if anybody wants to reach out to us at Fast Fix Call,
Mm.
we'll send you the technique. Very, very simple. It only takes 5 seconds. But if you can do this maybe 5 times a day, or just a couple to begin with, as small as the intervention is, it's way more effective than a week's vacation, because this is the way our body actually does process stress, mind, body, and spirit. And, that's what a mini vacation is. And if you take 3 or 4 or 5 of those a day with a total time invested of like 2 minutes, you're going to be way better off than if you take a week's vacation, which you'll probably spend worrying anyway.
So, with all your learnings in your life so far, Scott, if you had to give advice to a younger version of yourself, what are 3 lessons you would give him?
Boy. Only 3? This is why Swedish people have flat foreheads, because they're constantly, uh, I've got a tattoo on my arm. I got a bunch of them, but one of them is "Get over yourself."
Yeah.
And I only have to read that about 500 times a day to just realize this isn't so serious. I'm certainly not this so important. I wish I had known 20 years ago that this is really meant to be enjoyed, not to be suffered through. I think that's really the main thing. And with respect to burnout, the good news is that we do cause it ourselves 90% of the time, which means, however, that we can cure it. We don't have to wait for anybody else to shape up. One of the illusions of burnout for me was, well, it's my business partners or my clients or the bank or, all of them, sort of a victim kind of a ideology. I wasn't aware of it, but I know that's what I was doing.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, as my mentor pointed out to me, Scott, you're going to have a long wait if you're expecting all these people to shape up. They're not going to. So it looks like you're going to have to shape up. And that was something that was way overdue when I finally got it.
What is one question I should have asked you, but I haven't?
Well, you've asked some great questions, David. I really appreciate it. Let me see. I had thought about that because I think that's a great way to end the show. I mean, I guess the main thing is, will this work for me? I mean, that's because, burnout people tend to be pretty cynical and pretty dejected. And one of the main questions I get is, yeah, well, I know it's worked for all these other people, and I know you have empirical data and it's based on science and so forth, but will it work for me? And the answer is, if you're thinking that thought, then you're exactly the right person.
Mm-hmm.
There is hope for you, and this will absolutely work. And you just need to get started. And a tiny, tiny amount of action can move mountains as long as you move in this sort of counterintuitive direction.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, sir. Well, Scott, thank you very much. 30 minutes on the dot right now. So if people need to find you, what's the best way to find you and what you're up to?
Fastfixcall.com is the best way to get information and to get some free help to take our online burnout assessment and just understand, is this apply to me or not? My new book called You're Not Toast is coming out in, I guess, next week. And if you want to hear more about that, go to Burnout Breakthrough. Either one of those places, fastfixcall.com or burnoutbreakthrough.com. And either way, we're very happy to help you.
All right, Scott. Well, thank you very much for making the time today, Scott. And thank you, everyone, for listening into the podcast. Have a
Thank you,
day.
David.
That's a wrap on this episode of the Coachful Coaching Leadership Podcast. I'm David Fung, and my mission is to help leaders grow, lead with impact, and build thriving teams. If you found this valuable, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a fellow leader. Until next time, keep leading with purpose.